So I'm convinced that when Queen Elizabeth passed away, God bless her soul, the spirit of the crown left with her. That's gotta be the reason why season 5 turned out so badly. It doesn't even feel like the same show as before. This came as a big surprise to me because leading up to the season premiere, I really gotten my hopes up. Between the death of Queen Elizabeth and the phenomenal trailer they released a month before, the new season was supposed to be a big deal. In fact, I got so frustrated partway through that I turned the TV off. Yeah, that's a big deal because this is, well, was one of my favorite shows. And I never do this. I almost did that in season 4 when Charles and Diana were screaming at each other the whole time. But with Olivia Colman playing Elizabeth, I wasn't going anywhere. I'm not the only person who feels this way. My mom texted me and even she wasn't having it either. I felt like everywhere I looked, nobody had anything nice to say about it. To me, this is the biggest sign of how bad the season was. They spent a whole episode on someone who wasn't even in the royal family at all. In fact, he wasn't even in the UK. He was off somewhere else. And it turned out to be the best episode of the season. Not that there was a lot of competition. So what I ended up doing was scrolling through Netflix and I stumbled upon another royal show. It had actually popped up under my suggestions a few times before this, but I kind of just ignored it. This time, I was so desperate for my royal fix. So I clicked on it despite expecting it to be some cheesy royal drama. I mean, there's a lot of those.
Will you marry me?
Yes. Yes.
I was completely surprised when the show ended up exceeding all my expectations. In fact, I liked it so much that I ended up binge watching the whole thing, even though there's only 6 episodes. So if you're like me and you feel like season 5 left a bad taste in your mouth, you have to give this show a go. I'm not gonna give away the title just yet. First, we need to have a serious conversation about what went wrong with The Crown. In order to talk about where season 5 went wrong, we need to talk about what made The Crown so special in the first place. It's almost like there was a magic formula that The Crown used to really draw us in and get us invested in the show. The first ingredient, of course, was, God bless her soul, Queen Elizabeth. The writers couldn't have asked for a better person to write a historical drama series about. Everybody knows Queen Elizabeth. Many of us practically grew up with her. She's universally loved, but also she's famously private. And unlike many of the people around her, she wasn't just running off to write her memoirs or tell-alls. She didn't let just anybody into her personal life. So I was excited when we finally got to see what happens behind palace doors. It's like being let in on a part of her life that she tried to hide from us. I know it's a drama series, not a documentary, and I look forward to people reminding me of that in the comments, but it's sometimes fun to indulge in a fantasy. I mean, if you've ever seen the Meghan and Harry docuseries, you know what I'm talking about. The Crown may not be based on real events, but it presents a version of Queen Elizabeth that we can all connect to. They take this person who lives this extraordinary life and show us that she has the same feelings that we do. Jealousy, frustration, and even joy, occasionally, depending on her husband's behavior. The next ingredient was how they brought to screen Elizabeth's inner circle. The first thing we learned from The Crown is that being queen comes with its own share of downsides. Few people understood this better than the people closest to Elizabeth. I mean, there's a lot of conflict. By showing us not just Elizabeth's side, but also what the people closest to her were going through, the show helped us understand their unspoken difficulties, their conflicting motivations, and ultimately the reasons for their actions, even if their decisions are questionable. You can actually see how much respect the writers had for these characters and the way the storylines were all woven into the main story. They got me emotionally invested in the stories of these side characters without even making them feel like a distraction. Having all of these characters fleshed out made the world of The Crown feel real, even if it was a fictionalized drama series. More than anything though, The Crown allowed us to escape into the history books. Whether it's 1950s London when Winston Churchill was still smoking his cigars, or the Thatcherian 80s along with all the troubles. The visuals really set the scene. Grand, opulent, even though half of them were green screened, and the costumes of each period felt like a mini fashion show. All in all, I really felt like I was just taken away to another place. Then we get to season 5. Okay, My first big issue with this season was when I realized that the show was no longer about Queen Elizabeth. It's like the show kept its title, The Crown, but it wasn't even about the person who was wearing the crown anymore. It was about everybody else. Philip gets an episode, Margaret gets an episode, and Charles and Diana practically get their own miniseries. Well, the Charles and Diana miniseries basically started back in season 4, and going into season 5, I was already kind of worried how they'd balance it all, but we know how it ends. Dramatically. Anyway, I'm here to report it's a mess. It wasn't that they focused too much on Charles and Diana. I mean, they did focus too much on them, but the real issue is just so much bigger. Season 5 had no continuity. You could have actually just rearranged the order of the episodes, and I probably wouldn't have noticed. There were just too many storylines, and they all seemed to circle back to where they started. It was like one big royal roundabout. Charles and Diana are pissed off at each other at the beginning of the season, and at the end of the season, they're still pissed off at each other. Elizabeth's estranged from Philip at the beginning of the season, and wait for it, they're still estranged at the end of it. Margaret's still bitter, the Britannia is still decommissioned, and the Romanovs are still dead. It's like whatever magic formula they'd used in the earlier seasons is gone. By changing Elizabeth's role from the lead character to a side character, the show has lost the one thing that holds it together. Elizabeth. I didn't tune into The Crown to watch the Charles and Diana soap opera, and I certainly didn't tune in to watch the Did Philip Have Another Affair game show. I tuned in to follow Elizabeth's journey, because after 4 seasons, I am totally invested in her character, and I wanted to see what she went through in the 90s. I wanted that behind-the-scenes look at how she coped with all the tumult of the 90s, behind that stiff upper lip that she would put on whenever she had to face the press. Before season 5, Queen Elizabeth was the storyline through which all other storylines intersected. So when they turned Elizabeth into a side character, all these storylines actually stopped intersecting. It's like they all became unrelated stories and you had to follow each one separately as bits of each were just spread out across all of the different episodes. And for whatever reason, I just couldn't empathize with any of the supporting characters anymore. They all seemed to be so wrapped up in their own lives. It's like any chance that they could get, they would just be airing their own grievances. Oh, poor me. Who could play the bigger victim? Who was being cheated on? Who was being denied true love? Spare me. It was heartbreaking to see Elizabeth turn into everybody's punching bag. It felt like a cheap way for the show to create drama. Instead of Life magazine remembers, we get a decade's worth of People magazine. Okay, now that we've shat all over season 5 of The Crown, I'm here to tell you that there's hope. And you don't even have to sign up for a new streaming service. If you want a show that perfectly recreates that magic formula that made the early seasons of The Crown so good, you have to watch The Empress on Netflix. The Empress follows the journey of a young girl, Elizabeth, that's handy, who unexpectedly becomes Empress at a young age when she gets married off to the Emperor of Austria. Sound familiar? The show follows her as she struggles to adapt to that rigid imperial system she married into. I actually found myself really connecting to the character of Elizabeth, or Cece, as everybody calls her. The writers did a great job of creating a sympathetic character that you just really end up rooting for. A big theme in the show is the frustration she experiences as she's expected to conform to a life of servitude and duty. This is especially difficult for her because she's kind of a brat, which is actually one of my favorite parts of this character. She's carefree, she's stubborn, she's compassionate, and that's actually the biggest source of conflict between her and the imperial family. Because while she wants to help her subjects, the imperial family wants to stay as far away from their subjects as they can. It's almost as though the future of the monarchy is in her hands. Will she help her subjects and in the process threaten the monarchy? Or will she give in to what the imperial family expects of her and just lose herself in the process? It's this struggle that really kept me on the edge of my seat. And just like the early seasons of The Crown, the Empress has an amazing cast of supporting characters. From her husband, the Emperor, to his rather intense family, to her gaggle of ladies in waiting. I mean, they're fantastic. It's like they're all trying to out-lady in waiting each other. Each of these relationships with Cece brings a different dimension to the show. There's conflict between daughter and mother-in-law, tension between siblings, a surprising amount of comedy, and even some steamy scenes. If you can get past the fact that they're cousins, you'll be fine. This cast gave excellent performances, which really made me empathize with all of them. Even with the mother-in-law from hell, I ended up kind of liking her. By the end of the season, I really wanted to know what happened to these people in later episodes. As an added bonus, the sets and costumes were beautiful. Okay, I actually did a bit of research, and I discovered that unlike The Crown, who green screened for most of Buckingham Palace, the Empress actually used a real palace for the main residence in the show. I think they got it on Airbnb because it's actually listed there. You can stay there if you want. On top of that, this show has big, beautiful cathedrals, actual palace gardens, and they even filmed in a small village in Germany in order to portray the dirty, decrepit streets of 1850s Vienna. It's great. This level of detail and authenticity helped create that feeling of being in another time and place. I mean, watching The Empress felt like an escape from reality, which is something that I really enjoyed about seasons 1 and 2 of The Crown. So if you're thinking, wow, this show sounds too good to be true, there has to be a catch, you're right. It's in German. But don't click away just yet. If you don't mind a cherry British accent, the show is also dubbed in English. I actually watched it both with subtitles and dubbed in English, and I had a slight preference for the original audio, but the English dub was totally fine. It's more than acceptable. The Empress has been greenlit for another season, so if you get it now, you know you're not going to be left hanging. In the meantime, I'm terrified, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed for season 6 of The Crown. That's supposed to come out later this year. It's the final season, and I'm really hoping they bring the show back around to focusing on Queen Elizabeth in her later years. A lot happens in the late 90s, and it's in the early 2000s where Queen Elizabeth really puts that Charles and Diana drama behind her and grows into the iconic queen that we've all come to know and love. I don't know if I'm being overly optimistic, but I hope that when we look back in a year's time, season 5 is just going to be like a blip. That one bad season, and that's all. Blame it on the pandemic, whatever you want. Imelda Staunton's an amazing actress. Don't let her talents go to waste. So what did you think of season 5 of The Crown? Have you watched The Empress? Also, let me know your favorite royal shows in the comments. And if you've made it this far, subscribe to my channel to get more updates on my latest videos.